Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'll be showing you how you can easily use stretch lace to make some super cute underthings for your dolls. So this is a wide piece of lace, but I'll be splitting it down the middle along this seam. This makes it more manageable. Stretch lace comes in a lot of shapes, colors, and patterns, so shop around to find one you really like for your project. I'll be breaking this project into two separate videos, because the undies are a lot easier to make and I don't want beginners to feel intimidated by the next part. You don't need a pattern to make this, just two pieces of stretch lace. You'll want one that's just long enough to go around your doll's hips and meet in the back with a little overlap so it can be sewn together. Then you'll need a piece to go between the doll's legs. I like to use a really long strip of lace sewn to itself in a taper so the front end is narrow and the back end is a bit wider. Like this. For this piece, you just have to make sure it's big enough to fit the distance between the doll's legs. You want it to reach the hip band with a little overlap, so it can be sewn on in both the front and back. The piece I had for the hips was a little too short, so I start by measuring and cutting a piece of stretch lace, and then cutting it down the middle seam to split it in two. You can make a bunch of undies from just one roll of lace this way. I'll start by sewing the hip band. You'll want to put the lace with the right side against itself. The right side of this lace is a little shiny. Since my doll has a big measurement difference between her hips and her waist, I've also cut the end at an angle, which will help the lace taper inward toward the waist and lay a little more nicely. But that's totally optional. Since the lace is super stretchy, you always have the option of just taking it in a little more if it doesn't fit tight against your doll's body. I'll sew this in together using a stretch needle and a very short stitch length. I sew it twice to ensure it has extra strength, since the stretchiness will put more stress on this seam. Then I finish the edge with a zigzag stitch, also at a very short stitch length. The short stitches are important for the lace, which has a lot of gaps and holes. Using a shorter stitch means you're more likely to catch what little material there is. Next, I cut the strip for the crotch in half and then pin the halves to each other with right sides together. This was one long piece like I showed you before. I sew these pieces together at a free-handed angle, nothing super precise, just narrow at one end and wide at the other. Once this seam is sewn, I cut off the extra lace to leave a narrow seam allowance. It didn't line up perfectly, but that's okay. Then I finish the seam with a zigzag stitch on the edge and trim my threads. This can now be sewn onto the hip band. I line up the center seam of this piece to the seam on the back of the hip band and pin it together. Make sure you have the right sides of the material facing out. I actually pinned this awkwardly, so I'm going to flip it and repin it on the right side. But this is how it will look once the back is sewn. I'll sew along the bottom edge of the band to connect these two pieces. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and end of this seam to lock your stitches so they won't ravel. And also take your time. Stretchy materials can be really difficult to work with. Once the edge is sewn down, I also sew up higher, anchoring the edge of the crotch piece on the inside. So long as the thread is the same color as the lace, the stitches kind of become invisible. Then I line up the narrow front of the crotch piece on the center front of the undies and pin it in place. Just like the back, I'll sew the edges down. But this can be tight work, so make sure the pieces are in the right place before you sew anything. If anything is folded or overlapping, you might accidentally sew the lace together in places you don't want, and it can be really difficult to pick out those seams. After the front is sewn so that the edges are all connected, you can trim your threads, and then these super cute undies are done. This is a fast and easy project that most people can do. And for those of you who are ready for the next step, we'll be making a lacy top to go with it next week. That's all for this time though. Thanks for joining me again. See you next time. Bye.